What is up, Florida State fans? I'm Aslan Hajavani, flanked by the two best guys in all of college athletics sports writing, Corey Clark and Ira Schofel. Ira's our managing editor, Corey Clark, lead writer, senior writer, whatever else he wants to put on his business card. Thanks for watching this special edition of Warchant TV. If you're not already a member of Warchant.com, use the promo code Warchant30 for 30 free days of access to the ultimate Seminole sports source. Plenty to talk about for it being May, maybe, quote, the slow season. Let's start with football, obviously, gentlemen. First off, I guess let's start with you, Ira. Landon Dickerson news came down on Wednesday that he was getting back into the portal, this after he had been in it originally during the spring football semester. So he leaves the portal and now apparently is back in. And I guess at this point, there's really no turning back for him in Florida State at this juncture.
It doesn't seem like it. It seems like Florida State's going to go 0 for 2 in the transfer portal, reversals, re-emergence in the portals. Xavier Peters, the linebacker out of Ohio, he was in the portal in December, jumped back out. They convinced him to stay. Then he jumped back in, and now he's at Kentucky. And now Landon Dickerson, same thing in February. He went in the transfer portal, came back out, was around for all of spring practice, seemed like he was back on board with the program, seemed to really connect with Randy Clements, the new offensive line coach. Everybody seemed to be happy. And now the semester ends, spring semester ends, he puts himself back in the portal. And the fact that he put that do not contact tag on his entry in the portal basically lets you know that he doesn't want to be contacted by 100 other schools. He pretty much already knows where he wants to possibly go. Maybe he's got one or two main schools in mind. And so, yeah, I just don't think – it seems like he knows what he wants to do at this point after taking some time to think about it. And I also think Florida State's at the point where they have to – you can't beg him to come back again. Willie Taggart wants guys. He's made a big point about saying he wants guys who want to be here, who want to be Seminoles. If you go back and beg Landon Dickerson to come back again, I just don't know if the other players on the team can really believe in him as a leader when he's every other day he's back in and out of the transfer portal. So, yeah, I think this is the end of the road for him at Florida State. It's obviously it's a big loss on the offensive line, even though there were concerns about whether or not he'd be healthy because he hadn't really been healthy as of yet.
So, Corey, I guess, how do you reconcile that if you're a Florida State fan, if you're a Florida State coach? That Landon Dickerson, if you look at Pro Football Focus, in 2016 and 2017, he was the top-graded offensive lineman for Florida State when it came to run blocking. Last year, despite only playing in 2 games, I think was the number 1 pass-blocking offensive lineman, number 2 run-blocking guy, but obviously not someone who was able to make it through an entire season. I guess how do you kind of balance or reconcile the fact that is he the most talented guy they had, despite the fact that he was rarely available?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for the people on the team that have kind of gone out and played in a number of games, I think he had shown the most talent. He was their best offensive lineman that we had actually seen a lot from. But I guess a lot is probably too strong. We've seen some from, and that's the issue with Landon Dickerson and why I think, some people might look at this and be like, in fact, I was that way initially, like, okay, well, he was only going to play 3 games anyway, 4 games anyway. Not because he's soft, but some people are just injury prone. And he plays a position where they're always getting injuries. And he had a hard time staying healthy for a full season. And the track record now was pretty evident that it was going to be hard for him to stay fully healthy for another season. It's just not how his body operates, apparently. But not even that, not even what it does to the team, and we can get into that, like how they replace him. But it's what's going on where a kid enters the transfer portal, they talk him out of it, however they talk him out of it, he hops back out, and then after going through an entire spring and another offseason, late May, he decides to enter it again. That, to me, if I'm a Florida State fan, is much more concerning than just losing a guy that might start for you on the offensive line. What is going on within the program that now we have 2 kids, but one kid that was a guy you kind of counted on, a guy that was supposed to be a leader, like Ira said. What's going on? Why are they leaving? And isn't that a pretty significant thing to keep happening to this program?
Is that a fair question, do you think, Ira, to see if there's, maybe less so how do you replace him, but more so is this a sign that's emblematic of something that hasn't gotten fixed this offseason?
I mean, you could certainly make that argument, but the reality is none of us really knows what was going on in Landon Dickerson's mind. I mean, it may have been a situation when they talked him into staying in the portal. He may have, at that time decided, or coming out of the portal and staying at Florida State, at that time he may have said, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and stay, and I'll come back for my next year. But at some point, he may have changed his mind, but not wanted to confront the coaches with it. Maybe didn't go back to his teammates or coaches and say, I'm still thinking about leaving. Maybe he just sat there and decided, maybe talked to his family, maybe talked to people at other schools, former coaches who are at other schools. There's a lot of former FSU coaches that are at other schools. So maybe he's been talking to somebody else on the side and had an idea of what he wanted to do. And then it didn't matter. Maybe it didn't matter what direction the program was going in right now. The other possibility is that, you have a new offensive line coach, a new offensive coordinator, and maybe he still has concerns about the direction of the program. But we just don't know that. I just don't think you can jump to the conclusion because Landon Dickerson is leaving that means everything's going in the wrong direction, because anybody you talk to really around the team has said that the spring was much better offensively. There's much more cohesion. Randy Clements has gotten rave reviews from really everybody. So I don't think that – my hunch is it's not that. My hunch is the first time he went in the portal, he kind of already had it in his mind what he wanted to do, let them talk him into staying, but it's always been in the back of his mind, and he finally decided to go ahead and go. But like I said, I hope he's sure what he wants to do. I hope he knows what he's going to do, because at this point, I don't know. Even if he changed his mind, I'd be leery about taking him back, as talented as he is, just because of what I think it would say to the rest of the team.
The timing is.
You think I have two questions, Aslan? Yeah. Let me talk. I'm the lead writer. You already said so. I'm the lead writer. Number one, Ira, why do we call it a portal and not a database?
I'm curious who the first person that came up with that is, because it officially is not called the portal. Oh. I believe it might be database. It's something else. It's not officially the portal, but one of the first media outlets that wrote about it called it the transfer portal, and it just caught on. It's like the turnover backpack. That's not really the name of the turnover backpack, but it caught on.
I wouldn't say it caught on, the turnover backpack. Most people hoping it would catch on fire. And also, if you're in the portal, what's the difference between entering your name in the portal and just saying, hey, I want to transfer to Tennessee?
So the big difference is, and I was talking to somebody at FSU about this yesterday, and one of the concerns they have about it is how public it's become. It wasn't supposed to become public, but that's kind of the nature of the way this is set up. The way it used to work was a guy like Landon Dickerson would go to the coaches and say, hey, I want to seek my release. I want permission to speak to this school. And they would give them permission to speak to that school. I think the feeling was that a lot of the student athletes felt intimidated by coaches. They felt like they didn't want to confront the coaches and discuss it. So they created this way where they could just kind of discreetly put their name into the portal. The problem is every school has access to this, and then they're leaking the information. Everything's becoming public. And you could start to wonder why things come out. For example, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but Landon Dickerson coming out, the news coming out about Landon Dickerson was first reported by Cole Kubelik, who's an SEC Network guy. Well, it doesn't take long, a big jump to think that maybe an SEC school that's competing with Florida State for certain players leaked that information out there because he knows it's going to make Florida State look bad. I don't know if that's what happened, but you just wonder who's leaking this information and why, because it's not supposed to be public. It's just what's happened because of the way they've set it up.
The portal is supposed to be underground, like in a remote location.
Exactly. Kind of like
I think Ira said Topeka, or Aslan said Topeka, somewhere in middle America where a lot of coaches, it's in the middle or it's easy access for everyone.
Just a big silo.
Yeah, they're just hanging out. But also my next question was, what's the point of entering the portal? I thought the portal was to let people know, hey, I'm on the market. So what's the point of entering the portal to say, hey, don't contact me?
Well, I think they have that set up for if you want to limit who contacts you. So, once you go in there, anybody has the right to contact you. So what he's doing is he's saying, I don't want anybody to contact me. He doesn't want to be barraged with phone calls. He doesn't want his family to be barraged with phone calls and emails. And then he's going to contact the school he wants to go to. And again, I don't know where he's going to go. My guess is, one theory was I think Tennessee recruited him out of high school, and there's a lot of former FSU staff members and coaches who are at Tennessee. That seems like that could be a possibility. So maybe he already knows where he wants to go. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if it's either a school where a former FSU person used to work or now works, or maybe it's a school he considered coming out of high school.
So A&M.
Hey, you never know, buddy.
Hey, man, the portal goes there too.
Here's an analogy for you on that. I guess that question you kind of had, Corey. Think about certain jobs that get posted but have already been filled. Like they already know they're going to hire somebody, but they have to post the job sort of to go through the hoopla. I think Landon Dickerson obviously probably knows where he wants to go. That's why he puts that, do not contact designation, because he knows where he wants to end up at. What I want to ask you guys, and it's a tricky thing to kind of talk about or explain, but just the way the fans reacted to this, is that, and it's not anything that's unique to Florida State fans, but this is a kid, Landon Dickerson, that I think most people would have probably agreed if you were like, he's the most talented offensive lineman on this team. They would have said yes. And he's a guy that if he stays healthy, this offensive line is better, the offense is better, and by virtue, this team is better. But since he wants to leave, it's, well, who cares? He's going to get hurt anyways. You can't count on the kid. Which, I mean, they're rude somewhat, but they're fair and accurate criticisms. He hasn't made it through an entire season healthy, but I just thought it was one of these things where with Landon Dickerson, it's just kind of kicking the can down the road. You're going to expect him to not be available at some point in the season, but golly, 5 games of him is probably better than what they have on deck, unfortunately. And if you could just get him to be healthy, game 1 against Boise State, and you win that game, maybe that gives you enough win to propel you for the rest of the season, even if he does start missing some games. I think it's a big blow to Florida State, man. I really think other than maybe you losing Marvin Wilson or Tamorian Terry, I mean, those are the only 2 guys, if they left, I think all the fans would be like, oh my gosh, this is a bad move. Anybody else is expendable in the eyes of a lot of fans, but I think ultimately it's not from a culture or an optics standpoint of is Willie Taggart losing control. I don't think this has anything to do with it, but just the fact that you're losing your most talented guy on your most weakest link of a segment is just not the way you want to go into your off season.
No, it's definitely not. But I can see it both ways. I mean, I see both sides of the argument. I understand why people are saying the things they're saying. Part of it is, it's what we do as human beings. If you don't get a job that you're up for, I didn't want that job. Or if you
but
get
you're
dumped
lying
by,
to
I didn't
yourself.
like her.
But you're lying to yourself, man.
That's a natural emotion. So I'm saying I get why people do that. But there's also some reality to it. I mean, Gene and I did a video podcast thing of, several weeks ago, and we talked about the offensive line and pass protection. And on there, I said, I don't have any confidence really in them at offensive tackle. I mean, the junior college kid that came in, he's okay. He doesn't look like he's a guy that you think is going to be a starter this season. He didn't play offensive line except like the last year or 2. So he's very raw. You got the Ryan Roberts kid transferring in from Northern Illinois. You'd like to hope a 5th-year senior who started on the Division I level will be able to be plugged in, and he's got to be better than some of the options they have. I mean, he has to be. But I also don't know that he's going to be a guy that is getting all ACC honors, or you're just, it's a plug-and-play guy. And then you've got some other, Landon Dickerson's a nice, talented player, but I don't know that you could count on him. I mean, again, it's like the old coaching cliche, from old-time coaches, is the best ability is availability. And Landon Dickerson, for whatever reason, as Corey said, just bad luck or his body not holding up, he's for the last year or 2, he seemed this close to being a medical disqualifier. And that's unfortunate, but it's happened to a lot of more talented kids than him. I mean, a ton of talented guys have come through here in other colleges that their bodies just wouldn't hold up. So I understand both sides. Yes, you'd love to have them. They need them. It's a loss. But I also don't know that you could say it's the end of the world, because you might not have had them it's realistic to say you might not have had them for more than 2 or 3 games, because that's been the history.
How do you spin it forward then, do you think, Corey? I mean, I think Ryan Roberts from Northern Illinois would have been a solution at one of the tackle spots had Dickerson be healthy, but now you're looking at a redshirt freshman like Chaz Neal maybe at one tackle spot, and then a transfer from Northern Illinois at the other. The Juwan Williams reclamation project is an option. How viable, we don't know. Abdul Bello. I mean, and the transfer market right now doesn't seem like a very, viable solution either. So, I mean, what do you do if you're Randy Clements right now, Corey? You don't get paid the big bucks, but maybe you can help us out. I
mean, see if Marvin Wilson wants to play both ways. That should help. I mean, he might be great at the offensive tackle spot too, and that helps his because I'm telling you, man, the big, huge run stopper guys, I think they're going the way of the dodo bird in the NFL. They're not looking for those guys as much. So sell him on the chance that, hey, number one, this will help your Heisman chances if you're playing both ways, but also this might be where you're best at. Other than that, man, I don't know. Abdul Bello can't play. might be the best kid in the world, but Jawan might be a great kid. Neither one of those kids can play at this level. I think we have enough proof. So to me, those aren't even viable options. So, a one-legged Dickerson last year was better than either one of those guys. So I don't know. I don't know where they go other than you hope. Yeah, I think you hope Neal can be an answer, but is he really ready?
I don't think so.
It's not great.
I would say this though, and we've talked about it before. Look, I mean, Kendall Briles and Randy Clements, they're getting paid a lot of money. They were lured into this job because they're supposed to be, not would say offensive wizards, but they're supposed to have a track record for fixing offenses in quick order. It's going to be largely up to them. And I think it was going to be the case 2 days ago. I would have said the same thing. They're going to have to do things scheme-wise. I mean, that's really the beauty of these offenses is you're not supposed to have to be great on the offensive line. I'm sure at Baylor in the early days, and I've heard people that talked to Randy Clements basically has made the comment, if you saw what we had to work with in the early days of Baylor, you'd realize we know how to work around some things. So they're going to have to work around it and, get them help with the tight ends and backs, do things scheme-wise. The quarterbacks have to play better than they did last year. A lot of things have to happen for them to be better, but it's not going to be great. I mean, but it wasn't going to be great with Landon Dickerson either.
And somebody was going to have to play anyway because not to beat up on the kid, but we all know that the chances of him staying healthy for a full season were very, very slim. So somebody was at some point would have to be playing that tackle spot anyway.
It's going to be awful though if he goes somewhere else, stays healthy for 14 games,
miraculously healthy, becomes wins the Lombardi or whatever they give for the best lineman in the country. Yeah, that's Willie Taggart's luck, man.
Yeah, I mean the only thing example I can think of was like Frank Gore. I mean Frank Gore was blew out I think both of his knees in his time in Miami, and now he's going to be a Hall of Fame football player in Canton. Obviously it's a huge stretch, but yeah, you would think again 3 seasons that Dickerson played, he got injured and missed huge parts of it, that would probably be the case. But my point was just there's a lot of hoping and wishing and finger crossing from the fan base that things that happened last year were anomalies and it won't happen again. It's an outlier. And it's like, was thinking Landon Dickerson could get you 10 games like the most far-fetched concept being floated out there? Like a defense that hasn't had any changes staff-wise is going to get better just because, we hope. The team is going to be coaching a man down the entire season, but it won't matter because we hope. And then I'm trying to engage the people on the message boards, and you saw this, Ira. And then I'm like, well, it's hard to say this is some sort of addition by subtraction. But I guess to your point, too, that this goes into Taggart's whole philosophy of wanting to rebuild the roster, have guys that want to be there. And if Landon Dickerson doesn't want to be in Tallahassee, which he apparently doesn't, well, then you don't have to be in Tallahassee, and they'll roll out somebody else there, and they'll figure it out. Moving along now, there's a story right now up on Warchant.com that hopefully Ira can give us some more background on in terms of finances, the ACC and Florida State. This ACC Network is now less than 100 days away from launch, and it's a very important puzzle piece in terms of the long-term health of the coffers at Florida State for their athletic department, I would assume, right, Ira?
Yeah. Actually, I spoke to David Coburn over there at the ACC meetings in Amelia Island last week where this was a big topic. And then subsequently spoke with FSU President John Thrasher to kind of get their thoughts on, what's realistic with the ACC network. We've heard so much about it for years, but, how realistic is it to provide a major infusion of money quickly? And what about the long-term solvability of Florida State's athletic department's finances. So that was one of the big things we talked about. I've got a story up about that in the short of it, and you can read more about it on the site. But the ACC network is going to help, assuming they get these carriers picked up. Comcast has not picked it up yet. Spectrum in Central Florida has not picked it up yet. Dish Network has not picked it up yet. If those things happen, it's going to help. We don't know exactly how much, but it's not going to be a huge financial boom like overnight. And I think that's one of the concerns and why they're doing a lot of things in the athletics department to try to improve the financial picture, because that money's not going to really start rolling in immediately. And as people, certainly people on our site paid attention to, just a few days ago, the Big Ten announced that they're giving their member schools over $50 million. They gave their member schools over $50 million last year, basically mostly from their TV payout. The ACC, the most recent numbers we have is about $30 or $31 million. That was a year behind. So even if it went up a couple $1 million, it's still nowhere near what those schools in the Big Ten are getting. The schools in the SEC are getting in the 40, 43, 45 million a year. The Big 12, even the Big 12, which doesn't even have a network, gets more because they have less schools to divide it among. So Florida State, the Pac-12 and the ACC are bringing up the rear. And, this ACC network, if it happens and it gets carried over time, I think it's going to close the gap some, but I don't think it's going to be a quick fix.
Are you going to call your cable provider and demand the ACC network, Corey?
The beauty, as you well know, and people that listen to Wake Up Warchant know, I have two homes with two different providers. So I got Uverse up here in the Atlanta area, and then obviously I got Comcast or Xfinity, whatever they're going by, down in Tallahassee. So I get to call both. And you better believe it's going to be pitchforks. I'm going to be demanding my ACC network. And Ira, you and I have talked about this before, just a few hours ago, in fact. Have you ever watched anything on the Big Ten network?
No, not once.
You're telling me that Iowa and Minnesota get $20 million a year in athletic revenue than Florida State and Clemson, Duke and North Carolina?
Correct. Yeah. So what's that? 40% more a year?
I feel like that's right. I feel like you nailed that. Yeah, it's 40% more. You could just say $20 million more.
$20 million more.
To get into math.
No, wait, it's 65%, 66% more because it's 2/3 on top, right?
No, I think it's 3/5 more.
Don't make me have to moderate a math debate.
So
a lot more money.
So it's got. I mean, at some point, doesn't that have to even out? Like, it doesn't make sense for the lay person, the layman. I'm just a sports writer, man. I don't know
with two houses. I'm just a sports writer with two houses.
I'm just a caveman. I don't know any of this stuff. How in the world in, say, 2026 are Iowa and Minnesota and Northwestern and name another school in the Big Ten that's terrible, Indiana? How are they going to still be making that much more money than Florida State and Clemson? How is that happening?
Well, I mean, I think theoretically, if the ACC network takes off, and that's going to, they're going to close the gap. Look, what the Big Ten did, and I remember talking to Eric Barron, former FSU president Eric Barron, about expansion back when it was really kind of heated up, and people thought Florida State was going to leave for the Big 12 or try to get into a different league, and the Big Ten was raiding. They went and got Maryland, and they went Nebraska, and Missouri goes to the SEC, and he said, well, look, the Big Ten, they're going after flagship universities. It's like they're going after the big dogs. And there was even talk that, if they went to somebody in the state of Florida, they might go after Florida. They're going after flagship schools with huge populations and huge alumni bases. So that's what they've got. And so they're, they don't have a lot of, I guess Northwestern's probably, I don't know the population of Northwestern. I'm assuming it's not as big as Ohio State or some of the other big schools they've got, but maybe it is. But they don't have a lot of the ACC's got, you got Wake Forest and you've got some of these smaller schools, and it helps having Notre Dame because of those other sports besides football. It helps having some of the schools they brought in the Northeast in terms of getting those cable networks interested. But I think that's the overall problem. The problem for the ACC is you just don't have the mass numbers of the SEC and the Big Ten, and I think that's what's ultimately hurt you. Even if you have Clemson winning a national title or Florida State winning a national title, I just think it's the makeup of your conferences that is going to keep the ACC network, I think, from ever catching up to the SEC and the Big Ten.
What if we make Notre Dame, make them an offer they can't refuse, share their football money, their NBC money with the conference? Every team gets a cut of it.
Seems like they got a big incentive to do that.
I mean, again, you got to put maybe a dead leprechaun head, maybe a severed leprechaun head in the president's bed. I'm just saying, you got to do something, because when you hear that, I mean, Florida State fans, when they hear a $20 million difference, I mean, you're not competing on that level. And that's the Big Ten. I mean, the SEC is less than that, but that's, as we just said, that's like 40% more. They're making 40% more money each year. So over a 10-year span, you're talking about them making literally $200 more million than you. That's hard to compete with, right?
I still think it's 60-something% more.
Well, I guess
No.
to your point, though, Corey, I mean, this gap has been around for at least 5 years. I mean, the SEC Network's been around since 2014. I think Big Ten Network's been out even longer than that, and those schools have had this head start over Florida State and Clemson. But Clemson and Florida State remain two schools that spend the most money on their athletic, or at least their football programs. So, I mean, I guess there's a way to make this all work somehow. And I'm sure the answers are in Ira's story that he wrote, as he also sat down with President John Thrasher.
What do you guys think, like, Iowa is doing with that money?
Wrestling.
Just a bunch of wrestling practices?
Wrestling mats, wrestling headgear.
Singlets.
Everywhere.
Singlets, multicolored singlets.
Every student gets their own wrestling gear. That's cool, and their own wrestling mat. All right, cool.
All right.
Well, the other thing in that article, if people want to check it out at warchant.com, is President Thrasher also spoke about restructuring Seminole boosters, where they're at with that, and how that plays into it financially. He thinks there are some efficiencies and things they're going to do by bringing athletics and Seminole boosters a little closer together. They're going to help financially as well, and it's the first of 3 stories they're going to be running. I also have a story coming in the next couple days with President Thrasher and David Coburn, the athletic director, talking about football, baseball, other issues in the athletics department, and then I'll wrap it up with a kind of a feature about their relationship. David Coburn and John Thrasher have worked together for decades, literally going back to their time in the legislature. Why President Thrasher thought Coburn would be a good fit as athletic director, and why he took off the interim tag recently and made him the fixture as athletic director.
We should wrap this up shortly because we're going a little bit long, but we do got to get into baseball. And I wanted to ask you this too, Ira. I mean, why is it that this is now maybe becoming more talked about, or they're willing to cross the bridge to bring maybe boosters and the athletic department closer together, or restructure it? Has something happened? Is it part of the revenue gap that you discussed earlier? Is that part of the reason why this is now being seen as either an inevitability or something that could happen here down the road? Because this was obviously something that created a lot of friction with a former football coach that was on campus that I liked a lot,
yeah.
And I missed him.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely came to a public head, I guess, towards the end of Jimbo Fisher's tenure. Not just because of Jimbo and the boosters, but it was kind of like all parties involved. Jimbo, frankly, wanted control. He wanted to decide where the athletic department's money went, and he felt like he earned that by winning a national championship and putting the program back on the map. And so he wanted more control. Andy Miller and the Seminole Boosters, they've been doing what they do for 30, 40 years, back to the beginning of Coach Bowden's tenure. So they have feelings about what they want to do with projects like College Town and the Champions Club and things where they think that are important for raising money. And then Sam Wilcox, the former athletic director, had other visions, and the 3 did not really communicate very well. And so that kind of brought it all to a head. But talking to President Thrasher, this is the first time he's mentioned this to me. I didn't know. He said that when he took office, this was something kind of on his mind. He's been concerned about it because he looked at, the situation FSU has with their boosters, where Andy Miller, the Seminole Boosters, don't report to the athletics department at all. They report to their board and then the university at Westcott, but they don't report to the athletics department. President Thrasher's point was that worked for a long time with Andy Miller and Bobby Bowden and Dave Hart and previous athletic directors. But that doesn't mean it's going to work in the future, whoever else is in those spots. So he wanted to come up with a better structure, and this kind of brought it to a head. It doesn't sound like the boosters are going to report directly to the athletic director, but there's going to be a much stronger kind of a dotted line where they're forced to communicate. I think they're going to force them to work on projects together and plans together. The way it was recently was basically it was up to the AD whether he wanted to involve Seminole Boosters in planning. It was up to Seminole Boosters if they wanted to, if the AD was going to, the AD's on their board, but whether or not how much they communicated. Now I think it's going to be much more set in stone. So I think it's hey, this worked for a long time. Doesn't seem to be working now. We need to set up a better structure for the future.
Corey, your thoughts? You don't have any thoughts. It's fine. Let's talk about baseball. I want to get your thoughts on this, Corey. I know you're lining up something with Teddy Cahill from Baseball America. Florida State
Well, we're trying
I'm
to.
speaking into an existence. Florida State has to play NC State on Friday in Durham as part of the ACC baseball tournament, and then we'll see what happens from that point forward. I feel Florida State doesn't win Friday against NC State, they're going to miss the tournament for the first time in Mike Martin's distinguished career. Why am I wrong?
Yeah, so I don't know that you're wrong.
All right, good. Ira's up now. Ira.
I'm not necessarily a bracketologist. I'm not Corey Lenardi, so I don't know how any of this works. I know from the people on Twitter that it's a very bad bubble this year, meaning it's a very weak bubble. There's not a lot of deserving teams. So even teams that you would be like, man, I don't know how in the world they would get in, they're still in the running to get in, including like Florida, who was 13 and 18 in the SEC, lost their conference tournament game, and I think went like 3-8 or 4-8 in conference and weekend series. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this, but they did well in their midweek series against Florida State. They actually rebounded from all those tough losses over the weekend and were able to win every Tuesday they played Florida State. But so they have a winning record in the ACC. They're competing with other ACC teams for, you would think, one of these at-large berths, like a Virginia and a Clemson, and they beat both of those teams. Boston College, well, they actually lost that series to Boston College, but I think they have a better record than Boston College conference-wise. So there's a lot that goes into it, and I talked to Mike Martin Jr. about it, and he doesn't think that the fact that it's 11s last year will come into play at all. And I think the three of us, being sports fans and doing what we do, kind of want to say to ourselves, you know what, it shouldn't come into play. The most deserving team should go, whether their coach has been there for 40 years or 40 minutes. The most deserving team should go. But if it's razor thin, if there are three teams vying for two spots, and Florida State is one of those three, you know what, man? If it's close, tie goes to the legend.
Yeah.
Tie goes to the legend. Sorry, Michigan. I feel bad for your kids, but it's Mike Martin's final year. He's done a lot for college baseball. If it's close, like within a whisker, one way or the other, it would be pretty bizarre if they chose like a Michigan or a whoever, Virginia, who's on the bubble too, over Mike Martin in his final year. Not saying that should happen, but I could see how they might they might have a Mike Martin provision in there to get him into the tournament. That said, it probably would help them if they win on Friday night. I don't necessarily think it's a death knell if they don't, because, again, I think they'll be judged more on the first 56 games, not the last one.
But I think those conference games that are played on a neutral site, I mean, you factor that into the fact that they went into this tournament, they went into this week pretty much needing to desperately win one game, and they blow the opportunity against Wake, and if they can't beat NC State, plus the fact that the way they looked against Louisville, they got no hit by Stetson. They lost to Jacksonville at home. They got blanked at home by Pittsburgh.
Hey, why you got to bring up old stuff? Why you got to bring up all this old stuff, Aslan?
It's just, you talk about the 55 games previously should matter more so than what's happening in Durham. I think Durham is just a further indictment of just how up and down and frankly down this team has been this year, and that's why I think if they can't get past NC State Friday, their season ends in Durham. Ira, where do you stand on the topic?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we could say it's a slam dunk either way, just because the bubble is so soft, and there's not a lot of reasons why you'd say Florida State has to be in there, but there's a lot of teams in that situation. Like you said, Florida, their conference record is awful. Now they're in a much better conference. And really, that's kind of where this season was very unfair to Mike Martin in terms of the conference with the way they scheduled non-conference with a weak non-conference schedule. You kind of get it. I know with a young team, they want to get those guys to build some confidence early in the year, but then the ACC was so bad that they really couldn't pick up any wins. And then they had the frustrating thing is every time they were close, and you guys would lament it when Wake Up Warchant frequently, but every time it seemed like they were getting over the hump and maybe separate themselves from those bubble teams, they'd have just an inexplicable loss. And so I think what's frustrating about this week is the format, because if they used to do it where you play 3 games in pool play, so that gives you another opportunity. I think just having 2 and blowing the one against Wake and then having to come back against NC State, who's a better baseball team than you, that's a lot to ask. So I'd hate to say that that's why they're not going to get in, but at the same time, I feel like they kind of needed to show something. So if I would not have any objections if they got left out. But at the same time, there's a lot of other teams that aren't very good either. So but I would say this, I don't know if I agree with the idea of the Mike Martin clause because I don't think anybody outside of Tallahassee cares. It's not like you're getting somebody in who's going to spike TV ratings. I mean, Florida State probably won't even be, whatever Florida State regional game they're playing in, it may not even be on any of the ESPN proper stations. I just don't think anybody's going to care about FSU baseball right now. So I don't think there's any incentive other than sentimentality, but I don't know if that's going to change anything.
All right.
Sorry.
For Corey Clark, I'm pointing the wrong way. For Irish FL and for Corey Clark, I'm Aslan Hajavani. Thanks for watching.
Hey, can I interrupt you real quick? Did you tell people about the student thing?
No.
They're not watching anymore.
I don't think it's going on anymore. The tweet's been deleted.
Oh, okay.
So, that's fine.
Hey,
For Irish FL and Corey Clark, I'm Aslan Hajavani. Thanks for watching. Stay connected, as always, to warchant.com.